And then there was this guy. He was very handsome. He was way much better looking than I was, and he was incredible at football. And so those are two things that mattered when you were 15 years old. And so I didn't like him, actually. To be fair, I was a bit like, I can't take this level of competition. But then we just stuck a real bond. Today on our podcast, we are talking about going back to school. As a parent of a 2 and 5 year old, a 3 and 5 year old, my daughter Ocean will be furious that I got her age wrong. She'll be like, I'm almost 4, Daddy. So I got a 3 and 5 year old. My son is 6 next week. He's going into year 1, which is thoroughly exciting. And I'm over the moon to be getting them back out of the house into the world of education where I think they belong. I think they get a better experience than they do hanging out with us, trying to find space in between my meetings, my workload, and all the things that they like to do when I'm off. But today I'm joined by an old friend. We could talk about how long and how old we've been acquaintance for. I'm with Shanna Darshville. How are you, Shanna?
I'm good, thank you, Marvin. How are you?
Did I say it right, by the way? Because it's a fancy French name, so I just need to get it right. I think I said it right.
Yes, you did, Darsheville. Yes.
Okay, cool. I didn't add the in the middle. I didn't give it the full French. I didn't give it everything. Shanna, thank you so much for joining you. Before we even touch the idea of what the podcast is about, I have known you from 15, 16, your 16th birthday.
Yes, that's correct.
Now,
so we're going on like 20 years plus.
So we need to contextualize this now because, first and foremost, you need to know that you when you were 16, I was probably 17 or maximum 17. I couldn't have been much more older. How old are you? Are we allowed to say that?
I'm 36. I'm going to be 37.
See, they were the same age. We would have been the same age, just to make sure. You're just like, so we were the same age. Yeah. It wasn't like I was like 32 and you were 15. So we've known each other for 20 years. And most beautifully, you married my friend. What's the actual correct language? Because he's no longer with us. He's passed away. So I will tell more about him.
Late husband.
Late husband. So your late husband, Reese, who I grew up with. And so the story of your husband is really beautiful because I'm trying to remember. I know we went to the same school at one point, but I think my friend from my estate, Joel, introduced me. His dad or his gran used to live where Reese lived. And I can't remember the name of their estate now, but I remember it's Brown. But it's around the corner from Kerridge. Kerridge. So he lived in Kerridge, and so I followed my friend there one summer. And there was this guy. He was very handsome. He was way much better looking than I was, and he was incredible at football. And so those are two things that mattered when you were 15 years old. And so I didn't like him, actually. To be fair, I was a bit like, I can't take this level of competition. But then we just stuck a real bond. And between sort of 15, because he also came to my school. When I think I met him, might have been 11 then, because he weren't in secondary school yet. So he joined my school afterwards. And, I was a year older or 2 years older, you look out for him. He doesn't need looking out for, but I was like, you leave him alone. He's a good guy. And then we just got really, really close. And so in the summer holidays, we would spend pretty much every day going to different adventure playgrounds, avoiding gangs. That was another thing that we would just be trying to do at 11 years old, trying to stay away from all the crazy things that was going on. And we just had some of the best summers ever. Now, a lot of this happened before you were together, so technically none of this matters. But we definitely did. We definitely did have a couple of run-ins where we met some women. And what I'm thinking is, when you're like in your teens, meeting women
or girls at that age.
Let me contextualize. You're right, girls. Yeah, we met some girls, and obviously when you meet girls at like 13, 14 years old, it's very low-key and basic. It's like we'd held hands and went to the park together, and then we sat side by side, and I pushed her on a swing and she pushed me on a swing. Like, it's that level. So we would always found ourselves in some weird double dating situation, where he would take his choice and then I would get whatever's left. Now that's not fair, but it's true what happened. And then we went to your birthday party. I didn't actually know who you were, and to be completely honest, I think if I remember correctly, it was a little bit spicy at your birthday because there was a clash of identities and people from different areas, and we were like, maybe we shouldn't be here. And your 16th birthday. What do you remember from that time and that day?
I just remember it was in my back garden. I remember, like you said, it started off just being like all local people, but then I think as kind of other people were like walking past and being like, "Oh, what's happening in here?" and trying to like come in, but there wasn't any complete strangers there.
Mm.
Um, I recall, like you said, there were people from different areas in Hackney, but everyone was kind of on their best behaviour and getting on. Everyone was enjoying themselves to the best of my knowledge.
So, what I'm gonna say, okay, yeah, and
Your
statute of
recollection.
limitations is now gone. So whatever is said is perfectly fine. No one's gonna
Okay.
come back. But I definitively remember after this party, us going outside, and we were technically in a
Hmm.
truce at this time between the two areas that were warring at the time. We was in a truce, and so there was a sort of weird, spicy undertone of what we could do because like we went there but incredibly light-handed. I think there was about five of us or something, and like these 12, 13 people turned up, and we were like, oh, you're all from the area that we don't get along with. This is interesting, but we're technically in the truth, so it should be fine, right? And then I
Hmm.
remember this conversation of us being surrounded and being told that if anyone tried to run, we could catch you guys, and like just looking at us in the eye, this heavily antagonized environment, and I was like, I am an innocent child of the Lord. I don't know what this beefy crud thing that you're speaking of, and I need to get the hell out of here. And so I escaped. I didn't say escaped, but we slipped off very quickly and found the 30 bus home. But I do just remember that as a particular moment in my life, and I was talking about it with Poet. I don't know if you know Poet. He does a presenter, but he grew up in Tottenham, but he seems to have connected with everybody, and we have very similar experiences. And Reese again, a very similar experience of growing up at that time in Hackney was pretty challenging. It weren't
Mm.
easy. It was a tough time. I don't think anybody got along. So it was Clapton, Holly Street, London Fields, Clapton Square, and then like Smalley, Clapton Pond. There's like all these areas, and nobody really got along very well. What do you reckon as a woman? What is your recollection of it?
Of the situation in Hackney in itself, or
That time at 2000s, yeah.
I can remember. I think that was like the start of the whole like Hackney Tottenham thing, and I just remember just being very tense. And I mean, I guess for the girls, we're slightly removed from the situation, but at the same time, when you've got family members that are involved, sometimes you are directly involved as well. Um, yeah, and I just remember a lot of times like going out places and things would kick off. And Hackney back then, it wasn't like how it is now, where all these venues you can go out and have a night out and nothing would happen, like guaranteed on a night out. And not even just necessarily like postcode was, but just even within the people in Hackney, like majority of the time something was going to kick off,
Yeah.
like it was going to get locked off. And I remember we had Hackney Central. Do you remember when they opened Hackney Central? And that was all right for a little time, but then again like
Wow.
trouble.
Mm.
And do you remember when they made Ocean as well, and that was good for a time, but then just troubled really. Yeah.
Ocean.
And then even before that, like our era going to like Palace Pavilion, that used to be the spot. And obviously that was along at the time what they used to call the murder mile. So again, it was just like a hot spot for
Mm.
things to kick off. So you just had to be prepared for anything at any time really in them days.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the thing is, now we're all grown. This was 20 years ago. We're
Exactly.
matured
Exactly.
significantly. What was really another thing that's really interesting is what I realized is because I spoke to some of the people who were around that time and
Hmm.
doing a lot of things. And when you speak to them now as adults, it's almost bizarrely like eerily peaceful, and you're almost
Hmm.
I just stare at them like
Yeah.
I think what one thing I probably came aware of is how much the environment created us and
Yes.
forced us to survive.
Yes.
I don't think people were like sitting there thinking of the most evil thing to do for their own
No.
benefit. Like it wasn't a darkness; it was just survival
Hmm.
at all costs. And in
Exactly.
fact, they're really pleasant people to speak to. I did a podcast with I don't want to say people's names because I don't want to put them in a certain light. But like I was doing a podcast with one of them, I was just sitting there and I was just like, I wish I spoke to you more as an adult.
Mm.
Like I wish we had more conversations because I think we would have learned quite a significant
Mm.
amount of things from each other now that we've kind of survived that and
Yeah.
we're not actually there anymore.
Yeah, but it's definitely growth as well. And I feel like when you grow up somewhere like Hackney, it's definitely like survival of the fittest and only the strong survive. And when you do, I feel like it puts this fire in you to want to achieve. Because I find a lot of people that have grown up in Hackney, the ones that have made it have actually achieved quite a lot. And I feel like that's that that strength that it gives you as well. So
Mm.
there's definitely two ways to it. Yeah.
So anyway, we've all grown up. We're all mature people. We both have
hmm
children. I have two. How many children do you have?
I've got two boys, 10 and 13.
Now, I want to make a sound effect at this point because you have two boys, which is
Yeah.
already a thing. It's a whole
Yes.
thing. And then you have them in almost, one's in teenage years and one's approaching. What is
hmm
the survival mechanic for that? Please share with the audience.
Um, I feel like with boys, anyone who has sons will know they're very, very energetic. I
Mm,
think the key is channeling that. I think that,
mm,
especially my son at 13, he's at that point where he's really pushing boundaries. And I feel like it's the consistency in the rules and regulations that really helps. I think you can't be wishy washy. It's not like yes one day and no one day. It's got to be consistent. So I just feel like with kids, when you have things laid out, and they have specific times, numbers, there's something they can see. I think
mm,
that works well for my children anyway. So like we have a specific bedtime, we have our whiteboard of all our activities, so we know what everyone knows what they're doing and what they're meant to do, what they're meant to be doing at all times. And I
mm.
think that sort of structure really helps for me anyway.
Yeah,
But
I'm gonna ask a question
yeah.
because the question is not really important, but the answer is really important for
hmm
everybody. And
yeah.
the idea of like being a single mother raising men,
hmm yeah.
young men. So, and I think we've had a generation of people who have characterized it as being a problem. You're
Yes.
doing it in real time right now in an era
hmm
where you mix online and just general information age with this
yeah.
generation. They're a lot more involved in things than we probably were.
Yes, they are.
How
hmm
what first of all, what's the experience like? And then like, is there any element in terms of like the role of, more masculine energies in a home, or like how do you counter, not having the presence in the house?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I'm one of those people as well. Like, I was raised by a single mom, and I mean, as much as my mum was really hardworking, like she achieved a lot. She owned her own home. I found it slightly embarrassing. I'm not going to lie, and I think that's because I went
Mm,
to a school that was like middle class, and everyone had parents. So being a single mum was something that I never ever wanted to be. So obviously I got married, I had children, and I was like, to me, I was like, that was like such a fulfillment in my life because I was, like I said, in a marriage, had my two children, and then my husband passed away, and it was like I became the person that I never ever wanted to be.
yeah.
And I feel like in the beginning I struggled with it. Like I wasn't used to making decisions on my own. I wasn't
Mm,
used to like disciplining the children on my own. I wasn't used to, it really made me understand what it is to be a single mother, which is much more than just a title. You're literally doing everything on your own. You have no support. Obviously you have family that can help
mm,
you, but in regards to that intimate support within your home, you're doing everything by yourself. But that's why I have to work with this structure in that routine, because as much as you have to do what you have to do as a mother for your children, what I learned was you have to actually prioritize yourself, because if you're not okay, if you're not practicing
mm,
self-care, if you're like frazzled because you're just constantly on the go, then you're not being as productive as a mother as you can
yeah.
be. So I learned that in order for me to be the best mom that I can be, I have to put myself first. I have to make sure that I'm okay mentally, physically, spiritually, because then my children can come close
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
being up there with me as well. So that's one thing that I learned. But yeah, I mean, you just have to be much more organized in things. It's the case of even like you have to be more financially organized, because if, God forbid you run out of money, there's no one to say, oh, you take care of this or you take care of that. Everything's
Mm,
on you. But I feel like with my children, so my oldest son was 9 when my husband passed away, the youngest one was 5. So it's actually weird the amount that children actually learn and pick up just in that amount of
mm,
time, and what they have learned and that legacy that he's left behind with them. So I'm very happy that they at least had that. So a lot of, I feel, the way my children are was already in place when he passed away, and I feel like that continues through
mm,
them. But yeah, I mean, it's not easy. I mean, thank God. My mum and dad are very helpful, and his mum as well, and his family. So, in terms of, if I need support in that way, I have it. But most of the time, everything's on
mm.
me, and I think that's the
What was
difficult
really
thing.
beautiful is that, and I don't want to be saying this, but when you was just before we started recording, you were speaking to your children to like close your door, and you
hmm
channeled my inner mum in you, like my mum. I felt that energy, and I just realized that. you just can't afford to not be clear, because the level of repetition that's
No.
required, or the level of like, and I realize like now dealing with my son,
Yeah.
that my daughter just falls over untouched, unannounced, under no pressure. She'll
Yeah.
fall over and cry as if
Mhm.
someone like threw a brick at her. And you think to yourself that, that doesn't
Yeah.
erode completely. There's like, it reduces, but even at that age they just do stuff and you're like, why have you done that? That makes no sense based on who you are, let alone based on what I think you should do. And I think you just have to become really, really clear. Is that something that you've kind of understood and experienced yourself? Were you that way before, or have you become that?
It is. To be fair, yeah, I'm like the bond that I have with my children now is like very different
Mm,
to how it was before. So when you're in a partnership, sometimes you can, fall back. Like I don't want to
mm,
be the disciplinarian today. Like you be and I don't have that anymore. So I have to find that balance. But you have to also know your children.
mm,
All children are different, and even children with the same
mm,
parents are totally different. So I know for my children, I have to be
mm,
very precise. So if I'm giving instructions, I can't be like, right, go downstairs, get this, do that, then do this. I have to say, right, go and do this. And when you've done that, come back and I'll give you the next instruction. Like, I don't know if it's just my son's boys. I find them
yeah.
very hard of hearing. Like, you have to like repeat
Mm,
yourself constantly and it gets tiring. So I'm literally like, okay,
mm,
do that and then come back here. And a lot of time, right, this is now the
mm,
second time I'm asking you, and just trying to really, sometimes children obviously don't understand the stress that they're putting on you when you have to keep repeating yourself. So I'm like, this is now the third time I'm asking, and just trying to be clear. So what I find works sometimes is writing rules down, because
yeah.
then I'll just point to it and I'll say, look, you know what it is, it's in black and white. Like, so I find that helps with my children. It's just being very specific. But yeah, I spend a lot of time talking and a lot of time repeating myself. But again, for my own
Mm,
like self-care and mental health, I just sometimes have to Musa, okay, I'm gonna take five
yeah,
minutes and
yeah,
then I'm gonna come back to this. But luckily my children, I mean, they're not disrespectful or anything like that. They just have to be told a few times to do something. But yeah, it gets it even
yeah, yeah, yeah.
repeating gets
I'm loving
draining
this frequency,
sometimes.
by the way. As you're speaking, yeah, it feels like my mum is here, because that's like, it's almost like it's almost like you've channeled into a spirit of like just clarity. And I think so there was a point where
Yeah.
when I first had my child, I didn't say I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder, but not a big one. But I was a bit like, I know how I want to raise my children,
Hmm.
and I was carrying that energy just a little bit too heavily.
Yes.
And my mum was obviously trying to chip in and be
Hmm.
like, "Hey, this is
Yeah.
what I think, and look out for this, and have you considered this?" And I was like, "No,
Hmm.
conscious parenting is something that I know very well, and so I'm going to." And I think like there was a
Yeah.
point where I just kind of excluded her a little bit from the process and not made her feel like her voice matters, while secretly really wanting her to be involved. And I think
Mm.
one day I went to the house, and I
Yeah.
and I remember, walking to our house. I lived around the corner, about 10 minutes away. So I took Blake, who was like 2 weeks at the time, to the house, and just by chance she was just there. It was like 9 o'clock, and everyone was like resting, and so we was in the living room, and my son was sleeping, and we just had the most beautiful conversation, which just made me understand all of
Yeah.
this, like what you're speaking
Yeah.
of now, like the challenges of being by yourself and having to speak. And at the time I was like, what, but then when you're
Yeah.
when you're 30, you're like, oh yeah, that's really annoying, isn't it? So
Yeah, definitely. I think it takes for you to become a parent yourself, for you to have an understanding of, and it brings a lot of clarity in regards to your own upbringing and how your mum or your dad or whoever was, because now you understand it better. And I
yeah,
feel like sometimes when you do have children, it does bring you closer with your parent as well, because in the back of your mind, you're like, mum was always shouting, and you're always upset, and you're always this, and you're always that. But it's not even that. Like I said, it's just those pressures of doing everything by yourself and not getting time for yourself, which is why it is important to prioritize self-care, just so that you can come, back down and start at zero again, um, and get some of that patience back. But yeah, it does give you that understanding and that bond. So I completely get that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So in terms of like the summer holidays, how did you survive?
Hmm.
Like, what was your what was your? Because
So
I struggled with my little 2 week segment that I needed to lead on.
yeah. I actually got quite lucky this summer holidays
Mm.
because I found a football camp for them to go to, and it was run by
Oh,
Better, so it was actually very reasonably priced. So because I'm a member, it was like Monday to Friday, 10 till 3, and it was only £20 per week per child, which is like gold dust.
what?
Because most exactly, exactly. So I'm like ringing everyone I know, like, listen, get the kids up to Whitty. Like they've got this football camp. It's 10 till 3. It's only £20 if you're a member, £25 a week if you're not. And everyone's exactly like you. What? Okay, we're there. So
£25.
they did that for the 5 weeks. Like this is the first week that it's been closed because they're back to school next week.
Yeah.
So that was a lifesaver for me.
Mm.
Just having that period where, and also working from home, it's difficult. Like this is the first time I've actually worked from home during the summer holidays, and I was really like, how is this gonna work? So that was a lifesaver for me. But I feel like if you don't have that, what helps is, with me, I'm a planner. So everything I do is planned out. So even if that's like, at least 2 or 3 times a week, even going for a walk, going to the park, doing sightseeing around London, there's lots of free things that you can do. I know over at Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, they had like a screen that they were showing movies on again. That was free. I think, there's a lot of free activities that you can do. So try to like, majority of the time, find those activities, and then things that do cost, try to pat in between, but yeah, it's difficult. Again, I think organization, like, we all know the children are going to eat us out of the house at home. That's another thing that saved me, because they had like their packed lunch every day, so that was really good. But yeah, you'd have to like, loads of oven food, like for lunch and stuff, get everything organized. My children, their thing is the computer. So after they do their
what is the computer of choice, by the way?
They'll come home. So PlayStation 5.
Okay. Oh, whoa. Oh.
There's PlayStation. Yeah. I know. I moved mountains to get there, but I did. So they're happy with that. So yeah, but it makes me feel better, them having some time on it in the evening, knowing that during the day they've actually been at the football camp. So that makes me feel better. But yeah, that really saved me. But I feel like, not everyone's lucky enough to have a camp that they can send them to, because a lot of them are really, really expensive as well. But yeah, you just have to try and structure your days. And I feel like sometimes as parents, we have this tendency to feel guilty if we're not doing anything, or if we're not up to doing anything. But I mean, having children that are older from me, that's easier for me to say, because they kind of just get on with it themselves. Where if you've got younger children, it really isn't that easy.
I hear that. I think
yeah, you have to kind of
I think like, so I did the first 2 weeks, and it was kind of an interesting balance, because I was kind of like half leading, but Nina was still around, so I wasn't like by myself per se, but I was leading and like making sure that everything they needed, I was the answer, and then also just coming up with like stuff to do. And then so like, you start having a relationship with parks, adventure playgrounds, swimming, and you find a little routine. But what I realized is it was really, really expensive. But what I also realized is that by having 2 children, at first that they were actually like looking after each other and keeping each other busy. But by the second week, they started to gyrate and gyrate. Oh my, what a terrible word. Get on each other's name and grate each other is the word I was looking for. And so I decided to take my son to coding school. And it was like, I think it was in St. John's Wood. I don't know why. It's the only one I found. I Googled it. It was the closest one to me. I was like, I'm going to dedicate myself and go to this thing. And because I'm not a planner, I didn't have any idea that there was a free one, not far from around the corner from my house, that I only found out on the 4th day. And this course costs £110 a day.
This is what I'm saying.
And I was just like, so I was doing it because at first I was like, no. Because the thing is, I'm more mission driven and I'll find the answer. I didn't do any research. I did it last minute. And I was like, this would be a good idea. Then I launched in there with my masculinity, tried to think that was the answer. And after 3 days of paying £110 a day for this damn computer course, and he was just like, yeah, I quite like it. And I was looking at this guy, it's like, this is real money, bro. You need to love this. Yeah. I need more passion, otherwise you're not going tomorrow. And then I found Badu, and Badu was like around the corner from their house, and it was like,
Badu Sports.
Badu is an absolute G. He just like gave us, we just took him there, and he was a little bit ill, but he's there from 10 to 3, as you said, and it was just like super affordable, but also just great service. Just like, they're just like great people. And he just did that for the rest of the week. And then they went to Croydon for like 3 weeks. So they were in like by the sea in some caravan park and stayed in Bristol. And then they've returned, and it's kind of like a week to go. So it is an absolute nightmare. And I feel like it's a heist. I feel like they just need to get rid of this summer holiday vibe. I don't quite understand what it's for.
It's funny how we say that as parents, but as children, summer holidays are everything.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I feel you.
It's one of those things where like I used to love summer holidays and all my best memories come from there. But it was also really clear that as an adult,
Hmm.
I feel like I'm being
Yeah,
robbed on it's almost like a heist. How did you find
yeah.
the whole sort of academic year this year? Because I know they're going back to school now, but we've had a bit of a broken year. We were in
Mm,
lockdown for I think for the first three
yes.
months. Then we had like a 2 weeks in, then we went back for half term and we had 2 weeks
Hmm.
off. Then there was another half term. Like I started getting really annoyed at half terms. How has the year been for like your kids in terms of like consistency and pattern and education?
Do you mean like while they was at home and when they went back, like as a whole or at
Yeah,
school?
the kind of like the balance of going to school and back and homeschooling. How was that period for you?
I feel like during the first lockdown, like the first, first few weeks, month or two, it was like, yeah, routine every day. We're getting up like it's in school, right? That's it. Come on, you've got. And I mean, one thing that was quite good is their schools were equally both quite as good in terms of the work that they sent home. So they always had work. Because I know for a lot of parents, it was like,
Mm,
well, I'm having to find work for them myself. So it was all going gravy. I was really happy and proud of myself. Like, yeah, we're keeping in this routine. And then it was just like the energy, like I just couldn't be bothered anymore. I was just like, I'm actually sick of this. And I guess it's that again, it's the constant talking, it's the constant, man, what about this? And man, what about
mm,
that? And it was just too much. And I thought, you know what, I'm not going to be hard on myself. At the end of the day, we're going through a pandemic. This is hard on everybody. And I feel like it put a lot
mm,
of pressure on parents. And I said, I'm not going to do that to myself because this is stressful enough. So it got to the point where it was like we just do it in the mornings. And I was like, you know what, if you as long as you've done that, that's fine. And then there'd be times
mm,
when, the whole day it'd be PlayStation. And I was like, again,
mm,
that's fine. There'd be some days when, we'd go out, we'd go to the park and, as far as we could in terms of being able to leave the house. But
mm.
I just found that it made sense to do whatever we felt to do on a day. Like, obviously, for the kids, they're never going to get up and be like, we want to do work today. So it's like, all right, let's do a little
Yeah.
bit of work and then we can do this. But I found it quite difficult after a while. Like I said in the beginning, it was all fine. It was all, I guess, new, exciting, homeschooling. But yeah, it's just not it, just the consistency of it just was hard. And then what
Yeah.
I did find was that it's like the longer they were out of school, it's like the prospect of going back to school. It's like we don't want to go back to school when you're just
Yeah.
thinking,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So I felt like that as
No,
well.
you
Like they were
will.
so used exactly to being at home. And I was thinking, how is it going to be difficult for them to get back to school? Like, are they going to struggle? But I feel like with children, they are quite resilient. So when they did go back to
Mm,
school, they found it very tiring because obviously you're back to
yeah.
that sort of. But then I found that even the schools themselves, it's like they weren't really back into the full swing of things.
Mm,
It was like, do you have homework? No. What did you do today? It was all very sort of everyone still finding themselves. So I feel like that sort of helped because if they've gone back into it straight away, like full shebang, full lessons, full that would have been difficult. But I think the most difficult thing was just them getting used to the fact that you are actually going back to school because I thought some of them genuinely thought like there's no school anymore. Like we're literally this is it now. And then
mm.
obviously the summer holidays came along before they went back, so it was really like, are the summer holidays even necessary? And then there's that, are they even going to really go back? Because it was all very new. I mean, we talk about it now as if like but at the time, no one really knew what was going on and what was happening.
So,
But I think they transitioned quite well when they went back.
mm. So now that we're kind of going back into this term, we seem to
Hmm.
be past COVID as a major influence. Is there a piece of
Yeah.
you that's a little bit apprehensive? How have you sort of processed COVID as well in terms of your
Um,
children?
yeah, in regards to COVID, I never really let the fear grip me. I didn't listen to the news, like stayed away from social media that was like because I just feel like sometimes when you're too consumed by it, it puts this fear in you, which is not necessarily it's not necessary. And I feel like when I was in like the bubble of my house and when I took away that news, I even left my family WhatsApp group chat because it was like
Wow.
all of this information about COVID. Because, yeah, and this is what I mean about protecting yourself and protecting your mental health. Because when I was in that bubble without all that outside information, I felt totally fine.
Mm,
It was only when you put the news on, it's like 24/7 and this and that and this statistics, and they're making this great big hospital. And then the fear gets into you. So I took that away. So I didn't really know what was going on apart from just tell me if we can go out or not, if it's a curfew or not. I don't want to know about statistics. I don't want to know about anything like that. So that really protected me. In terms of the children going back to school, I'm not fearful of them, like, oh my God, they're going to catch COVID or anything like that. My main concern is I don't want the lateral flow testing all the time.
Yeah, okay.
Um, that's my concerns. And just about the schools, I feel like schools are really pushing boundaries in regards to being able to, administer things to your children, test your children, do all
Yeah.
these things without parents being present. So that's what concerns me more than anything. Like the COVID in itself is not really a worry to me.
So what I actually did some research for once on my podcast, and I emailed the Department of
Hmm.
Education to give us the formal like
Yeah.
headlines on what it means to go back to school. And some of the things that they said is that asymptomatic testing will remain, and it's an important
Yeah.
part of sort of reducing the risk of transmission within school.
Hmm.
And then they said at the start of term, students will be asked to take two lateral flow tests at secondary school, 3 and 5 days apart. So followed by twice weekly testing and reporting at home until the end of September when measures will be reviewed. So it feels like they're saying you've
Yeah.
been away for 6 weeks, come back, do some tests, let's get you, in a know that you're negative and then move on from there. They also said that following
Hmm.
the two initial on-site tests at school, college students will be able to collect their home test kits and continue twice weekly testing at home until the end of September.
Yeah.
Current public health guidance is that regular testing should continue for staff in education settings, even those who have been fully
Hmm.
vaccinated. Also, if you have
Yeah.
symptoms, even mild ones, you should take a PCR test immediately. They're still asking people to do that. Around one in
Hmm.
three people with COVID-19 have no symptoms at all. They're also saying that those who test positive should still isolate, which we kind of know, and then take a confirmatory oh my gosh, polymerase chain reaction test, a PCR test. I should know. Why did I say polymerase? I can't say it properly. A PCR test to continue to isolate. All tests should be reported online.
Yeah.
I do that for work now. And testing of education staff and secondary education staff should continue, even those who have been vaccinated. That's going to continue. I think they're basically just saying that, like,
Hmm.
also that the bubbles are gonna disappear as well. So like nursery schools and colleges will continue with some protective measures in place, including ensuring good hygiene. So they're still gonna ask people to wash their hands, like they did before, keeping places well ventilated. And I think like the removal of bubbles, back to group games. That they never had before, removing staggered starts and finishing times. Face coverings are no longer advised for pupils, staff, and visitors, either in classrooms or community areas. However, pupils aged 11 and over should continue to wear face masks on dedicated school and college transport when traveling to and from school. Those are pretty much the big things. Does any of that make you feel safer or more
Um,
informed?
I mean, I know all of this. My son, like my older son in secondary school, so they have the whole lateral testing flow. He's never done it, by the way, because it is optional. You don't have to do it. Um, so for me, it's not. I'm the thing for me that the home testing. If I felt he had symptoms, or if I got a message saying that he'd been around somebody, then I would test him. But they're just testing because every couple of days. I don't want to do that.
Mm. And what
I don't want
specifically
to
is
do
the
that.
concern? Is it just the idea that they would have an agency over your child, or is it because the actual process of the test itself feels evasive to you? What's the actual
Yeah,
challenging
I
part?
think the process is evasive. I'm no conspiracy theorist, but like the things that they're saying about what the actual swabs contain, and then they say, oh yeah, but you'd have to use it X amount of times for that to even be a thing. But then it's like, well, the amount of times that you want these kids to be testing
Mm.
isn't that sort of a lot, considering how long is this going to be going on for. um and also in terms of being tested at school, I don't want there to be any point or any time when any sort of anything that can be considered medical or happens to my child when I'm not there. Like if anyone needs to be tested, just like they like to give out these flu jabs at school, anything like that, I can take my son to the doctors and have it done there in my presence.
Mm.
I feel like they're really pushing this thing where kids can give their own permission to do stuff, and oh, I give permission I to get the vaccine, and all of the little terminologies that they use as well when they sent that form home, I had to read it quite a few times because they just asked basically in several ways, can your child give permission to have this without you?
Wow.
So I had to really read the wording exactly. So that's my issue more than the testing in
Yeah,
itself.
that makes sense.
Um, yeah, that's what concerns
And then
me.
I suppose just sort of going forward now in terms of like how you're
Hmm.
gonna move forward. Do you have? I don't really matter if you have a view on necessarily, but do you think your children have a view on COVID at all? That's like that they've developed since experiencing it in terms of like whether they feel comfortable or safe. If they said anything to you about
Yeah.
going back to school, any form
Um,
of anxiety?
I feel like with anything else, like children will mirror what their parents are doing. So I think if I'd have been like, oh my God, panic shopping and this, that, and the rest of it, and really, like I said, having the news playing all day, having the children hearing all of that panic and all of that fear mongering, I feel like they would have been more anxious. They would have been sort of like, like a lot of people have been really worried about it. But I feel like where I sort of, like I said, we had our own little bubble. I'm like, I'm not having the news constantly on. Like I said, I'm removing myself from WhatsApp groups that are continuously throwing out these negative things and these things that, instill fear and worry in people. So I feel like because of that, my children have that sort of attitude to it as well. Like it's you be cautious but don't be crippled in fear, which I've seen happen to a lot of people. And I have seen like people that I know that have had that, where they're crippled by fear, where they're continuously watching the news, where they're so engrossed in what's happening and taking that all on, but the negative side of things, that I can see that also playing out in their children as well.
Mm,
So for me it's about trying to keep it level, because nobody really knows what this is really about.
mm,
There's so much contradictions in the things that the government say, but then what they do. You're not allowed to go to your children's sports day, yet thousands of fans are allowed to go to a football match. Like, it
mm.
doesn't make sense. So that's why I try not to take it in like that, because it just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
And I'm not gonna like rack my brains trying to like figure stuff out, but they handle it like I handle it because that's just what they've seen
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, yeah. But you have no apprehension about them going back to school as in terms of like returning to the institution. You have no fears or questions about you. You know they're going to go back to school in your mind.
Yeah, no, I don't, because like we've even over this summer, like we've seen, like the return of festivals and return of this and return of that, and I don't know. I just feel like I'm a positive person anyway, so I try to always think positively about things, but I don't have any apprehensions about them going back to school. No, I feel like the things that we said, like, if you have to wear a mask, fair enough. If you need to wash your hands, obviously you're being more aware of, people around you and how they may be feeling, but I don't feel apprehensive in the slightest, to be honest.
Mm. So, like, I asked a psychologist from a friend of mine just to give me some
Hmm.
awareness tips. So, like, if any child is anxious about going back to school, and this could be related to COVID, but also just in general, because it might be going to a new
Yeah,
year. You might be, I might have had a fictitious relationship with
exactly. Yeah.
someone. I assume your children have phones, so they're probably been speaking to their school friends. They could have fallen out. You wouldn't even probably even
Hmm.
know. So, they said the things to kind of
Yeah.
look out for is just if your children appear to be more clingy than normal. Also, if they're
Yeah.
restless and fidgety, if they complain about like stomach aches, which feel a little bit phantom,
Mm.
changes in their sleeping and eating habits, comfort eating is still a thing
Yeah.
even in children. If they start expressing negative
Yeah.
thoughts and worries about people and things that they never normally talk about, if they get upset and or angry quickly, so anger is normally like a secondary emotion. That means something else is going on, and they're
Yeah.
putting a front on. If they just start crying unexplainedly, I don't know what the relationship of a 13-year-old boy would be in terms of crying. I don't know how often a 13-year-old boy cries in 2021.
Yeah, I think like with my son, I can tell when there's something going, because like one of the things is quiet.
Mm,
But me, I'm like that mum. I'm like constantly checking phones, random, just take it out of his hand. Let me have a look
yeah,
and see what's going
yeah,
on. So I like to sort of, because I feel like with children, they have so much access to communication. Like with my sons, their main method of communication with their friends is like on the PlayStation. So they all talk to each other online on the headsets and stuff. But obviously the phones as well, and it can be difficult to work out what's going on. But I feel like as parents, sometimes, as subtle as it may be, we do have to kind of look for those changes in our children. And I feel like being open and being honest about, even as adults we have fears and we have anxieties, and I feel like when you share that with children, even if it's like going back to work or whatever, we have to, even though we're the parent and it's like, we're in charge, we also have to show a vulnerable side so that they know that it's safe to also show a
Yeah,
vulnerable
yeah,
side. Open up and be honest so that they can mirror that as well. Um, so I feel like, yeah, I'm constantly like, I think I am a little bit overprotective with my children just because of what happened with dad as well. So I'm constantly, are you okay? Are
mm,
you sure? Probably annoys my older son a bit more, but it just lets him know that if there is an issue, that he can come to me. And I feel like even sometimes at this age, I'm always conscious of having other male role models around because he might not want to speak
yes,
to me about things that may be going on. So it's about making sure that if you are a single mum, that your children, if possible, have access to someone who's a positive male role model that they may want to speak to
yeah.
as well.
And then they said that some of the key things to kind of to do if your child becomes anxious, which I think is always nice. Like conscious parenting is something that, and I'm not sure like what the kind of environment you were raised in, but my mum was pretty standard, like child of a Caribbean Windrush
Mm,
form of like there's a legacy of just like cussing and how you get cuffed around the back of your head and the sound
mm,
of laughter and family gathering. There's a
mm.
culture that's attached to like blackness when you're second
Yeah,
or third
yeah.
generation Caribbean. But like conscious parenting, I
Hmm.
suppose it was more. There's probably just a bit more like control and molding going on. It was almost like fit into this shape, and I always just felt like my mum had four of us and she was by herself. So there's only so much consultative parenting that you can actually do. Like right now, I have two children, there's two of us.
Mm,
So if one of them needs extra care and time, one of us will catch it. And I think that's the true value of
yeah.
having two parents in the home. It's like you can raise incredible children on your own. You can do it healthily, powerfully. I think there's just little things you just are going to miss
Hmm.
by the law of averages when there's one of you. And I think my mum missed
Yeah.
like maybe five things in my
Yes.
whole childhood. And I just think like, having another person around would have been able to spot that and be like, oh, I see Marvin is not happy. Let's like talk him through in a different way, a different way of solving things.
Yeah.
And you're right about like having a village and kind of like intentionally trying to find other people around to tune into because
Mm,
that's really all it takes. That's what the answer is. It's not like
yeah.
because obviously if you had I don't know, an
Hmm.
LGBT, a lesbian mothers who were having children, they would still be loved and seen, but you still need the energy and
Hmm.
frequency change that would guide them a little bit. So the things that they said that they would do if your child is anxious is to like listen and empathize to their worries, which is really good because I think sometimes you want it to be
Hmm.
okay, so you start coaching them into like it's gonna be fine, almost like Instagram
Yeah.
captions, and it's like actually allow them to make sure that feel like something isn't
Yeah.
quite okay, and just empathize with it. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Like my daughter falls over unannounced now. I don't say it's fine. I just be like I'm really sorry that happened to you, and I give her a hug and then let her get on her way. And I think that's maybe a slightly different way, which encourages her to have her own view on the experience that she's
Yeah.
got.
Yeah. I think children definitely need space. And I think sometimes as parents, it's like not that we don't take their concerns seriously, but we're like,
Mm.
listen, you're happy, you haven't got any bills to pay, you live rent free, all you got to do is go to school. And we kind of can sometimes dismiss their worries or their anxieties because we're like, what do you have to be anxious about? But I feel like, especially, those sort of things around mental health, like anxiety and stuff like that, I feel like it's much more of an open conversation now. Even the word mental health, you hear it everywhere now. It's not, people are more willing to have those conversations. So I feel like sometimes, and I sometimes speak to my son about things that are going on, and I think it's absolutely ridiculous. But to
Mm.
him, I can see, like, if it's a falling out of a friend, it's the whole world. So I try to, deal with it in that seriousness. Tell me what's happening and try to give advice rather than just being like, really, that's the problem. And like you said, trying to coach it, you have to
Mm.
give children space to speak because children are growing up in very, very, very different times than we were. And it's funny when I say that because it's like when we was growing up, my mom will be like, it's so different now. It was much simpler times when we was growing up. And now I find myself saying the exact same thing.
Mm.
But within that, you have to understand that things that we might not have thought were anything for them it's a big thing, and with them, with social media and all of this sort of stuff, the pressures that they're under are very different, but they're very real as well. So we
Yeah.
might think it's silly, although this only got 10 likes, and we're like, really? But to them it's a big thing. So I feel like it is about making sure that you give them space and that you speak to them and that you let them know that, you feel that you think their thoughts and feelings are valid. Because if you don't, then it might be something where they actually do need your genuine advice, but they feel like, oh, you're not even going to take me seriously, so I'm not going to bother, which obviously we
Mm,
don't want. So as much as sometimes I'm listening and my eyes are glazing over because it's like some really silly thing, but I can tell to him it's a lot. So I try to just, okay, right. So, how are you feeling about it? And but do you know what? Parenting is swings and roundabouts, because like you said about, your mum and the way that she is, like my mum has tried to be the opposite of the way that my nan was with her. So her idea of what she thinks is good parenting is really different. And then I'm trying to not do some of the things that my mum might have done.
mm,
So everyone has their own things that they're trying to sometimes emulate that their parents did, but also sometimes not
yeah.
repeat. But every child is different and every parenting is different, and there is no manual and there is no guide. What works for you growing up might not necessarily work for your children growing up. So it's all about knowing what works for you and within your household, and what works for your children, and even, your own parenting style, what works for you. Another someone's parenting style, you might think, oh yeah, look, that works for them and their
Mm,
children, but it doesn't work for
yeah,
you and
yeah, I
yours.
hear that. And what I love about that is that, like, because I think about when my son was going to, and we're still talking about things to do whenever your child appears anxious about going back to school for any, whether it's
Yeah,
going back from
yeah.
to the same school or going to a new school or going like to secondary school. When my son was about to start primary school, we used to, on the way to the shop, we would go to the school and go past it and go round and talk to him about, school. This is where the class is going to be. This is the building. And like,
Mm,
look, you playing football here. And we did it so many times that when we did it for the big day, we all went together as one big family. It was a really nice moment. And then he definitely clung
yeah,
on and he definitely held on. But I saw some of the other children, and everyone's different, but I saw some of the other children and they were really, really traumatized by being left and going there. And you can
yeah,
see how maybe that may
yeah,
have added value, but they say that's another really good thing. But if it's ongoing, that you should just let your teachers know. I think sometimes we don't necessarily see teachers as allies. We kind of see them as a barrier to our children sometimes, and
yes,
and they can be
sometimes,
very
yeah,
very helpful, and they are there more than likely to help. And so
yeah,
I think so. There was one time when my son like I don't want to go to school, and he never says that, and so I think I was away, and I rang
mm,
him and I was like, so talk to me, and then he was playing up and not going to leave the house, but when I got to him when on the phone, he was just like, "There's a guy at my school and they ruined my game and they didn't say sorry, so I don't want to go in today."
mm,
So I rang up, like, because I'm super proactive. Like, I'm this close to taking my child to private school at any single point, and I'll
yeah.
do the same thing
You
there.
have to
So I
be,
was just like, "Look,
yeah,
my son said this, and he said that it was dealt with, but they still didn't say sorry. Just letting you know, he didn't want to come to school today. That's not like him." And I think because he has a reputation in the school also as being like the most helpful or whatever, I think they also realized that they needed to double down. So they created a mediation process. So when he went into school, they all sat down and then the guys
mm,
apologized to him in person. And for me, like teachers can play a role if they're enrolled properly as to what the problem is. So that's really important. Arranging a
yeah. Communication between
for
parents and
sure. And
teachers
to
is
be honest, I
definitely
think sometimes
important.
as like black people, we always had a combative relationship with teachers, so we never really look at them as a safe space. We look at
Yeah.
them as a barrier for our kids' education
Hmm.
that we have to tolerate. But if you let them know and listen to their feedback, there is something. It's not always attack on like your parenting.
Mm,
Then also just you can arrange for like handoff, so you can ask the teachers to come out and like make the transition a bit smoother and stand next to you. So like one of the things that you can like we used to do is just like the teacher would come out of the class and then like stand. This is what he used to do in nursery. She'll meet me at the gate, and then we'll hang out together for like literally 30 seconds, and then I would walk in, and then we'd transfer. So it felt more like we were a unit that he was transferring
mm,
over into. The last one is just being positive, and then also just like letting them know that you're not alone. Like I think what you just said about talking to them, even though it sounds bizarre, like I got 10 likes on Instagram, and you're like,
mm.
but like also just being like,
Yeah,
oh, have you tried this? And
yeah.
like, so I think really buying into the things that they're passionate about. Was there anything
Mm.
there that you kind of like discovered or that you really felt was like a really important point to drive home to other parents?
In regards to, sorry, I missed the first bit that you said.
So was there anything there that you kind of like, really discovered we went through in terms of like signs of anxiety in children, but also just like what to do if your child is anxious? Or was there anything that you just felt
Yeah.
was really, really important to drive home to other parents?
Yeah, because with my youngest son, after my husband passed away, he went through a period where, from being the happy, bubbly, popular child, that he did go through this period where he was he was quite anxious. And one of the things was like I would take him to school, and it's like, no, you have to watch me all the way till I get to the door. Sometimes you could just go to the gate and like, see you later. It was like, no, I want you to watch me walk in. Like there was one point where he was calling me, and it was just me and him in the house, and he didn't realize that. I don't know where he thought I went, but I didn't hear him, and he was like, like really. So for me, what that taught me as well is that in terms of the relationship with the school, it's best that you let them know what's going on. And I know, like you said, sometimes as Black people, we have a tendency to say, what happens in our house, the school doesn't need to know about it. But they
Mm,
do, because then what happens is they're not aware that, yeah, your child might be feeling anxious. They're not coming to school. They're not being moody. They're not being defiant. They're just crippled with anxiety. So you do need to let the school know what's going on. And sometimes, this is quite what I'm learning. It's actually quite, it's quite in children, anxiety is actually quite a big thing for a lot of them. So schools actually have interventions in place, and they have things that they can do, and timeout cards and breakout moments. So it's
mm,
good to be in tandem with the school so that they can help you, because otherwise, if they don't know what's going on, like I said, your child ends up getting labeled, and then you end up then
mm,
getting into that combative. And I feel like when you're open as a parent, and when you're present, and even if it is just going to the school gate or going to the classroom and just, oh, how was day today? I think that you'll notice a difference in the way that the teachers interact with both you and your child, when they know that you as a parent are, you're present and you're active.
mm. That's really dope. Shanna, thank you so much. It's been like amazing to
It's
actually sit down
okay.
with you. And I also just
Thank
feel like it
you.
was long overdue anyway. So it's kind of glad that it's
Yes,
happened in this context. Do you want to
just a
tell people?
public conversation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Just some stuff that I wanted to know anyway. Like how are the kids? And just start talking about it in the
yeah,
podcast. How can
yeah.
people find you? And do you want to tell people about the event that you're aiming to organize later on this year, and what the
Yeah.
goal of it is?
So it starts on the 23rd of September, and I work for an organization called Stopwatch, and Stopwatch is we're the leading voice on stop and search. So we educate people about their rights to stop and search. We provide free legal advice if you have been stopped and searched and you're not happy about it. We do a lot of research into stop and search. So what we're doing at the moment for our online summit is that it's called Raw Rights and Wellbeing. And what that's about, it's about focusing on how we can heal as a community from the trauma of stop and search, and also continuing that education. So one of the workshops that I'll be running, because it's 3 days full of workshops, is a parents discussion, which Marvin is going to be chairing and hosting. And we're just going to be talking about, parents and some of the concerns that they might have with, their children, especially young boys, being out and about by themselves, knowing their rights, what to do if their child does get stopped and searched. So we're going to be having a conversation around that. It will be a safe place for people to share their experiences. But it's basically going to be made up of lots of well-being, lots of space for people to talk about what they want. So we're going to be having writers' workshops where we're talking about representation in literature and how that can help, meditation, yoga, using those mediums to deal with some of the trauma. And trauma from stop and search doesn't just come from being stopped and searched. It can be, witnessing a stop and search that might have been particularly tough.
Mm,
It could be from members of our family being stopped and searched. It could be from the anxiety of knowing that, husband, brother, father, whoever, child is out on the street and they might be stopped and searched. Because I don't think that people realize just how traumatic it actually really can
yeah.
be. So that's what it's all about. It's about the well-being side of it. It's about healing from it. It's about making sure that we're educated, so if it does happen, we know our rights. So that is what it's about. And you can find out all the information on our website, which is www.stop-watch.org.
Mm.
Um, and that's where you can find the information about the event. You can search it up as well if you search Stopwatch on Eventbrite, you can register for some of the events that we're going to be doing as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Shanna, you've warmed me significantly today. You've reminded me of
Oh, thank you,
a really
Marvin.
positive interaction. And I think like and I mentioned this to you earlier, just about the conversation that me and your late husband had. Just, I think might have been like
Yeah,
a year and a half maybe before he passed, but it was just about this
yeah,
idea of marriage and more men showing up, and doing the honourable thing to create really strong, structured family units. And
yeah,
that was really beautiful. But the one thing that I said, and I'm saying this from a distance, is that like there's a
Hmm.
certain gravitas that a particular type of woman has that makes you feel like I can do this. And we're in an era now where we're
Yeah.
like redefining partnerships anyway, but like you always had that. And I
Yeah.
feel like you're with someone, you're married to a person, and that's a really really important thing when you're trying to create a family unit, because as you've identified throughout this podcast,
Hmm.
it's infinitely difficult. And you need to be able to take that challenge on with someone who's going to really stand strong with you, and really show up, and you've done that.
Yeah.
So this for me is a bit of a seminal moment, but I'm just happy that we had a conversation. I look forward to chairing that panel, and if you ever need me for anything, I'm always about. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me.